Good evening, my dear friends. Come on in. Grab a drink, a bite to eat, and settle in by the fire. For tonight, I have quite the story for you. Are you ready? Good. Then let us begin. My last video, The Tea Raider, covered a dark family secret and the tragic life of an innocent young man. While I do hope that it may one day help someone who listens to it, I would like to move on to material that isn't so emotionally heavy. I have mentioned my granny's father, my great-grandfather, multiple times in prior stories, but I have yet to elaborate on him. This man turned storytelling into an art, and his favorite stories to tell were ghost tales. He especially delighted in his older years, telling his grandchildren and great-grandchildren scary stories when they came to visit him, watching the youngest ones be too spooked to go down the dark hallway in his house to the bathroom on their own without someone to guard the door from the things that go bump in the night. Now, while I do know his personal stories were true, the ones he wasn't involved in should be taken with a grain of salt. Some of them he did get from friends and neighbors, but as for which were true and which were tall tales, I'll let you be the judge. Tonight I, Phantasmal Poppy, am proud to present one of his favorite stories. I give you the tale of an open grave. Years ago, there was a man named Carter. Carter was what most folks referred to in the old days as a vagrant. Personally, Carter considered himself a free spirit. From the time he was a young boy, he had been plagued by wanderlust. As he grew to manhood, Carter wilted at the thought of being tethered to his father's store, and the idea of having to constantly plan out what to do with this field or that pasture was enough to drive him mad. No, he wanted to travel, to be free of the responsibilities of running a business and homestead. So, when he reached the ripe old age of 16, he struck out on his own, planning to leave the mountains of his youth to see what the rest of the country held in store for him. It wasn't an easy life by any means, but it was free from most responsibilities. When he was hungry, he either took what he needed from nature or begged it from the nearest homestead. If he needed money, he took up odd jobs in the towns he visited. At night, the stars were his blanket, and the earth was his mattress. This was the life Carter lived for almost 2.5 years. One evening, as it was getting close to dusk, Carter figured it would be a good time to find a place to sleep. As he was walking along, he spotted a cemetery in the distance. In modern America, you can mostly find high school kids trying to conjure spirits with Ouija boards, amateur ghost hunters, and the local stoners hanging out in graveyards at night. They're not places to go if you want to party it up with a bunch of people. Back in the late 1800s or early 1900s when this happened, even fewer people wanted to be associated with the dead once they were in the ground. This meant that they were usually fairly deserted, and safe from overly cautious farmers or local lawmen who didn't take too kindly to the able-bodied a-begging. That made it a perfect place for Carter to rest. Since it had been a nice summer day, the ground would still be warm fairly late into the night. Thoughts of lying in sun-warmed grass danced in Carter's mind as he drew closer to the cemetery. But in order to get to the cemetery, Carter had to leave the road and walk through a rolling expanse of field, meaning he would have to walk down one very long hill and up another steep one in order to get into it. That was fine, though. Cemeteries high up on hills like that brought with them extra protection, as even fewer people would be willing to go so far out of the way to get up there to cause mischief. As he approached, he noticed that there was a good metal fence with close-set posts around it, which meant the likelihood of larger animals, like coyotes, wolves, and bears, would have had a tougher time getting in. Thankfully, the gate was secured only by a loosely wrapped chain, so Carter had no problems making his way inside. By now, the sun had set, and only the dimmest light illuminated the distant sky. If he wanted to find a really nice spot, he needed to hurry. He looked around. Even in the dim light, he could see that most of the graves were very old. The lawn had been kept up at one point, so there were not the great masses of thorns and brambles he had encountered in other lesser-loved cemeteries. However, it was clear that the graveyard's keeper had not come around for a while, for while the grass was still soft from some recent trimming, it had grown into a thick carpet, which was exactly the sort of earthy bedspread that Carter had been daydreaming about. As he moseyed about the grounds, fatigue from walking began to set in, and his eyelids began to grow heavy as he listened to the traveler's only lullaby, the droning of cicadas and crickets singing their hearts out before the rising moon. His exhaustion was quickly overwhelming him, causing him to not pay as much attention to where he was going. One moment, he was steadily plodding through the cemetery. The next, the ground had deserted him. Carter only barely registered catching his foot on the wayward tree root. Thankfully, he had the presence of mind to try to right himself, at least enough to throw out a few awkward steps to keep himself from cracking his head open on a nearby tombstone. Unfortunately, his luck was very short-lived, because he soon found himself falling into an open grave. The fall very much rattled Carter, knocking the breath out of him. The fall likely would have been a whole lot worse had the grave not been a very old one, which at some point had become a deep sinkhole in the earth. The vestiges of sunlight had gone from the sky by the time his breath had returned, leaving him with only the scant luminescence that the rising moon provided. When Carter felt ready to get up again, he stood, immediately falling back to the ground. "Great," he thought. "I've broken my ankle." He felt around on his bare foot, but didn't feel anything out of place. Perhaps he had merely curled it as he was stumbling around above. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped the sore appendage before standing and putting a bit of weight on it. Better, but not great. Carter looked up. He had been looking for a secluded place to rest that night, but he wasn't very keen on staying in a hole that had certainly been made with someone else in mind. Still, he was a bit on the short side, and the hole seemed to be a bit deeper than he would have liked. He hopped up, trying to grab hold of the ledge, but with his foot injured, he really couldn't jump as high as he would have liked. Next, he began feeling along the walls of the grave, reaching up to see if he could find any ledges or stray tree roots. Unfortunately, it must have rained not long ago, as the earth was fairly soft and crumbled beneath his fingers. Neither was there a single stick or tree root in sight for him to grasp. Then he began feeling along on the ground. He didn't really like the idea of having landed on a half-buried coffin, but if any of it had broken during his fall, he might be able to prise a board from it and help dig his way up. Carter wasn't that disappointed to find what part was unsubmerged from the dirt was intact, as he hadn't truly relished the thought of using parts of someone's final resting place to extricate himself. Finally, Carter got the idea of trying to walk himself up out of the pit. The idea was that he would brace his hands against one side of the grave and his feet against the other, and crawling up with one hand and foot at a time until he got to the top and, hopefully, found a way to pull himself out when he got there. Sadly, that idea, too, did not work out, as his injured foot could not take the pressure from the attempted climb, sending him crashing back to the bottom of the grave. Huffing with annoyance, Carter glared up at the vague outline of the top of the grave and tried to think of another plan, but none would come. At that point, the normally easygoing Carter started to get worried. The graveyard had been quite a ways off the road, not near a church, but up above a hayfield. That meant it was probably someone's family cemetery and might not see another person visit it for a long time. It was highly unlikely that anyone would hear him call for help so late at night, but being so far out of the way, what was the chance that someone would hear him call even once it got daylight? The idea that the open grave might become his own if he didn't find a way to get himself out of there chilled him to the bone. He got back to his feet, jumping on his one good leg, clawing at the ground and trying to reach the top of the grave. But try as he might, there was no way he could climb out without using his other foot in the process. And if it really was broken instead of sprained, then that would have made traveling a lot harder. The last time he fell back into the hole, he collapsed onto the half-buried coffin, utterly exhausted. Glowering wearily up at the top of the hole, he had to face the facts. It looks like I'm not going to be able to get myself out of this one tonight. It was then that Carter heard a voice ring out clear as day from the box below him. "I think you can." By the time Carter remembered he was still injured, he had long since cleared the grave and was almost to the county line. And there you have it, my friends. One traditional Appalachian ghosty tale from my great-grandfather. If you like this video, please do your dear old Phantasmal Poppy a favor and hit those like and subscribe buttons. And click that notification bell too, so you can catch your latest spooky fix as soon as it comes out. Good night, everyone, and see you all real soon. Shoo kitty. Shoo kitty. Shoo kitty, I love you. I love you, kitty. Yes, I love you, kitty. Yes, I love you. Yes, I love you. But I'm trying to work. Shoo kitty. Shoo kitty. Shoo kitty. Go on.